Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us on the FareCompare weekly podcast, episode number 39, close to 40, almost in the bag. My name is Rick Cini, the co-founder and CEO of FareCompare.com, and we're going to chat a little bit about a couple of new news topics. One is some on the good news front is complaints. Usually that's the bad news, but actually fewer complaints is good news. We'll chat a bit about that. We're also going to talk a little bit about one of my favorite topics, Cuba. So we're going to talk about a new wave of approvals for Cuba. And then we'll also hit our event of the week, the Festival de Ballet, and we'll chat a bit about that, and we'll also take a customer question as well. So introducing my partner in crime today in the video podcast from California, Ann McDermott, the editor on our site. Hey, Ann.
I love it when you say episode number 39. It's like this great long-running soap opera, but it's very informative, too.
Yeah, I was watching David Letterman being interviewed the other night. I can't remember who was interviewing him, and they had the number of episodes he actually did. I was like, I've got a ways to go. I think it was in the tens of thousands. So anyway, 39 is one small step for mankind, I guess.
Well, we'll just keep chugging along. And one of the things we'll talk about right now is airlines. We know they've been making profits, and apparently they've been doing a better job too, which is very nice.
Yeah, so it's sort of an equation. Since I'm a mathematician, it's airline profits equal charm offensive equal better on-time arrival statistics and complaints. So in the month of April, some good news there. I mean, the number of complaints dropped by about 20%. Now, let me make sure I put this in context. In order to find the DOT complaint page, you have to be very specific with your Google query. Or you can come to one of our blog posts that has the link to it. So you have to be pretty motivated to make a complaint. Most of the complaints are related to on-time arrivals, departures. So since we saw some better statistics there in April, actually up about 3% to 84.5%. That's really good compared to the last couple of months where it was in the low 80s at 81.5, for example, back in February. So that's good news on that front. Of course, and as always in these stats, there's sort of the best and worst. Yeah. The best for on-time arrival stats, for obvious reasons, Hawaiian, they have kind of a nice weather area. They do fly to Asia, a couple flights, and they do fly to the West Coast. Still pretty good weather there. But Delta and Alaska rounding out the top three for the best on-time arrival rates. And then, of course, we have to mention the worst. Still dragging up the rear, Spirit, Virgin America, and JetBlue. It turns out that some of the smaller airlines that don't have as many hub cities, they have a little bit tougher time with some of these arrival rates, especially when Mother Nature on their biggest city wreaks its havoc.
Well, I was a little surprised at Virgin America and JetBlue, but it's important to note that this is just for one single month, April, and there may have been some terrible storms. Virgin America and JetBlue both have hubs in northeastern cities, so you never know.
Yeah, sure. And I got a feeling May, when we saw those long lines in Chicago and elsewise on TSA, even though that's not specifically an airline issue, I guarantee you the number of complaints people will have found the DOT complaint form, and I guarantee you will see that number go up.
And one thing I just want to add is anybody can access these statistics, these monthly statistics. You just go to bts.gov, that's Bureau of Transportation Statistics, and every month they come out with them. It's called Consumer something reports, and they seem very easy to find, and you can see each month.
Easy to find, hard to say.
Yeah, whatever. But it's out there, and I suspect that airlines, this is why they are adamant about trying to leave on time as early as possible, because they know these things are published and anyone can see them.
Yeah, no, the airlines, and sometimes even some of the employees of airlines are compensated with bonuses based on some of these numbers and raising
Oh.
on-time arrival stats or lowering mishandled baggage rates, for example. So these numbers are important to airlines. So if you do have a complaint, basically lodge it with the Department of Transportation. I think what surprises me, Ann, is sort of the magnitude and the number. If you look at the numbers, it's only a little over 1,000 complaints for the month. I guarantee you there's more than 1,000 people that have complaints.
Yeah,
So
well,
it's really about their willingness to sort of make that and find that page and make the complaint.
yeah. Well, wouldn't you also suspect that they would probably complain to the airline first, and that this is like the
Yeah,
last resort of
I
complaints?
think so. I think that's probably also what happens. The thing is that the magnitude's not very big, but at least it tells us what the trends are, and the trends are good. Look, the airlines have made
Yeah.
lots of profits. We've seen some fees waived. We've seen some stroop waffles in the cabin. I'm going to say that in every video podcast. And so, we've seen sort of the charm offensive, and I think that's great. That's good for consumers. We've seen new aircraft. The air traffic control system isn't as stressed as it was. That's kind of bad for consumers, really, because capacity isn't increasing, which typically drives down prices. But in general, I think if you look at the trending numbers, it's a good sign. Airlines with money are
Yeah.
going to burn a hole in their pocket, at least on some of these things that probably need addressing, really, for the last 15 years or so.
Well, let's talk about Cuba now. I mean, it's happening. It's really happening.
Yeah, I'm actually trying to figure out how to get into a Cuban trip. I've never been to Cuba before, so I definitely wanted to check that out, and I'm really curious. And I guess the interesting thing about Cuba is we had the initial gold rush to Havana, right? When we had the announcements of all the airlines that wanted to go into Havana, I think everybody is aware that Havana's infrastructure isn't ready for the demand that's here, but the real question was, what were the other cities going to be like? Because they have several other cities you can fly into Cuba, and who would apply for those and who would get those applications. I was actually pretty surprised to see
Yeah.
the airlines that were actually here. We had American, Frontier, JetBlue, a local airline in Florida called Silver Airways, Southwest also applying for a couple of those cities. But it looks like mainly they're going to be flying out of South Florida, both Fort Lauderdale and Miami. I was looking at the cities, and I also thought it was interesting, too, that there was not one nonstop applied for out of New York.
Really? I am surprised, but do you suppose that'll come eventually?
I think it probably will. I mean, they definitely are limiting the number of flights. I think the Department of Transportation said something like 10 flights a day tops on these airlines for these cities. So, again, these are the smaller cities that are in Cuba. There's several of them that aren't the main hub city of Havana. So it'll be interesting to see. One of the interesting thing too is that if you look at Caribbean flights in general, there's
Hmm.
just not a huge amount of nonstop flights from bigger cities. Most of the traffic flows in through either Puerto Rico or Miami. Looks like Fort Lauderdale is going to be a jump-off point with JetBlue. Is super dominant in Puerto Rico now. American Airlines in Miami. Of course, we see also American flying sometimes the Caribbean out of Charlotte. So it looks like almost all the traffic in the Caribbean has to funnel through some of those sort of southeastern states, including North Carolina and Florida.
Well, as you point out, they haven't. These are the smaller cities. They haven't announced flights to Havana yet, and boy, I think that's going to be the big announcement. And who knows where they will okay flights from.
Yeah, and that means too that you'll be able to buy flights to Havana just like you'd buy online any other city. And all the crazy waivers that have been required, whether you have to be in a tour group or a variety of stuff, probably will be gone at that same moment as well.
Our one of your employees, our vice president of marketing, asked someone at American, are you going to have any deals when the flights are, totally set in stone and all? And they didn't say yes or no. They just said it will be competitive pricing. But do you think there will be deals?
I think there will be a few. I think initially on the routes, but I just don't get a good feeling that this is going to be a cheap route, because I think demand is going to be really high. Now, maybe to some of these smaller cities it won't be as much, but certainly to Havana, I expect maybe some initial introduction deals, limited number of seats for those deals, for example. I expect there to be a lot of demand for the first year or so, so I wouldn't expect prices to be too expensive. But really, Ann, look, we're talking about a 30-minute flight out of South Florida.
Yeah.
Will they price it like, let's say San Francisco, LA, or New York, Boston, or Dallas, Houston? I would think that the pricing would be very similar to that. So if we saw prices above $200 round trip, I'd be pretty surprised. Now, connecting in there, I think, is where we're going to see the bigger price increases. So you'll see, going into South Florida with connecting flights, you'll see it very similar to Caribbean flights, probably up until the first year or so, when this huge demand starts to drop off.
Sounds good. Let's take a question from a customer. This is from Macy, and it's a question we've never had before. Macy says, I don't have a driver's license or a state ID, and I am trying to visit family for the first time in years. Is it possible for me to purchase a ticket and fly? How would it work? Thanks for your help. So
anybody can purchase a ticket, because all you have to do is put in your name in order to buy a ticket. Now, herein lies the problem. Can you get inside the airport? And therein lies the problem with IDs. Essentially,
you do need an ID.
Essentially, okay, to get through TSA security, you need a picture-based ID. You'll have to get some form of a state ID. Clearly, Macy is off the grid. But this is not unusual necessarily for people to be off the grid. A lot of people don't have driver's license, for example, especially in larger cities. So you do need some form of photo ID. There is a whole list of types of photo ID you can do, but typically what you're looking for is one of those state IDs. If I remember correctly, you also have to have an ID for example, signing up for Obamacare. So they've basically made it pretty easy to get a state ID. So that's what Macy is going to have to do in order to actually get into the airport.
And I think a lot of people go to the DMV for that, right?
That's true. Now, I will note, you go to the DMV, and there's actually some that you can also go, I think, to a variety of other locations. If a DMV is not close to you in your particular area, they've set up those things. And a lot of it's, I know you have to have this for voting as well, so they've made it fairly easy to get some form of an ID that you can use. Just remember to always make sure that when you fill in your purchase thing, that you have your first name and your last name spelled correctly. They do check for that, and it's a big hassle if it's not spelled and matches your ID as well. The other thing I would note too is that if you haven't flown in a while, it might be worthwhile, Macy, to check out what TSA is all about. If you have kids that are under 18 or under, they typically don't need an ID. In fact, you wouldn't need an ID if you're traveling domestically in the U.S. So, but I got a feeling Macy is a little older than 18 and probably traveling by herself. So we'll have to get a state ID.
Yeah, they list a bunch of things on TSA.gov for identification. When you could just Google TSA acceptable ID, and these things will turn out. But I don't know. Do you have a tribal card? That would work. Do you have a border crossing card or a U.S. military ID that can be active or retired? But there's a bunch of things. But I'm betting you're going to have to probably go out and get one.
And remember, that's for domestic. So if you're traveling international, will have to have your passport as well.
Yeah, especially these days, they're very serious about it. So what is new? Oh, I just want to say thank you for your question, Macy. And if anybody else has got a question, please send it to customer.service@FareCompare.com, and Rick will help you.
Yeah, no, send me some hacker ones. I'm ready to do some hacking for people. We talked a little bit about hacking our way to the Olympics last week, so please send me those hacking ones where you're trying to get some crazy low airfare. I'll be happy to help out.
Well, Rick, I'd like to get some crazy low airfare, so you can help me out right after this podcast.
Sounds good. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about Cuba. We mentioned sort of the gold rush to Cuba, the two waves of the
Mhm.
gold rush, Havana initially, and then some of the other cities that make up the airport infrastructure in Cuba. Also, a very interesting event that looks like it probably will land right in the middle of these new flights being
Yeah,
available and
it
easy to
does.
do, which is an event at the Royal Ballet in Cuba.
It's called and I'm going to totally mispronounce it, but it may be Festival de Ballet de la Habana. It is the Festival of Ballet in Havana, and it's October 28th through November 6th, and it's been a biannual event since, gosh, the 1960s.
Early 60s. It's like the Ryder Cup almost. I can tell I'm a golfer.
Well, it's a little
But
different.
yeah, so yeah, it's a combination of the National Ballet of Cuba, I think the London Royal Ballet, the New York
Hmm.
Ballet, the Bolshoi Ballet in Russia also jumps in there, and also the Italian folks as well. So it looks like if you're into that, and I would love to see that, I think it would be awesome. It
Yeah.
looks like it's over about a 7 or 8 day period, late October to early November. So definitely check out our Adventurist app. You can download it on the Google Play or iTunes, well, excuse me, iOS App Store. I don't know why my daughter keeps asking me to put music out in the backyard for the pool, so I have iTunes on the brain. So anyway, hey, by the way, just Apple. If anybody from Apple's listening, it's a pain in the butt that you remove the radio app from Apple TV. So I'll just mention that in closing. So, but anyway, yeah, check that out. Check out the apps there. And I think I actually had another 8 or 9 destinations, up over 220 now in that general vicinity. So check that out. And also check out our video podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, other places you can get the video podcast. And be sure to send a question. I'm ready to hack some airfare.
Thanks, Rick.
Thanks, Ann.